deuxième invitée, intervenante de la journée. Donc c'est Anna Barbara. Nous sommes très heureux de vous accueillir. Alors Anna Barbara, elle est architecte et professeure en design d'intérieur et d'espace au Politecnico di Milano. Elle était professeure invitée dans de nombreuses universités à l'étranger. Donc l'université Tsinghua à Pékin en Chine, à Séoul dans la Corée du Sud, à Tokyo au Japon, dans des universités aux États-Unis, en France, en Thaïlande, au Brésil, en Jordanie, etc. Les relations entre les sens, le temps, les espaces et le design sont ces principaux thèmes qui sont développés dans sa pédagogie, dans ses conférences et ses publications, son travail professionnel. Donc, vous avez fondé une agence qui s'appelle Sens Lab. Et vous avez conçu des projets sensoriels à l'international pour des marques célèbres. Je rappelle quelqu'un, donc Pioneer, Panasonic, Honda, Toyota, Ford, Benini, et Natura, Vantone, Watts, et là en Chine, au Japon, et aux États-Unis, en Europe, au Royaume-Uni. Vous êtes auteur de plusieurs ouvrages, donc j'en cite quelques-uns. Alors, Storia di architettura attraverso i sensi, che è sorti en 2000, Architetture invisibili, Vivere i luoghi attraverso i sensi, 2006, Sensi, tempo e architettura, 2012, et Sensefulness, nuovi paradigmi per lo spatial design, en 2019. Alors, l'intitulé de votre intervention, que vous allez donner en anglais, je pense, you will speak English, est alors, Espaces amniotiques et l'Ange Exterminateur. Alors, je passe la fin.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you because this topic let us the possibility to explore, for me, to explore something that I already considered years ago, because and in 2000 I wrote a book named Storia di architettura attraverso i sensi that was trying to explore the architecture through another way of doing. And the exploration started from the senses and trying to understand if it was possible to redesign, to classify spaces through, not through styles, not through theories, but through phenomenologies. And in fact, at that time, one of the chapters of the book was called Amniotic Spaces. This was the first time when I started to explore this idea. And the reason why was because I felt that there is something very deep in our experience of spaces that he was also saying something before. And that goes back to that experience in the mother's womb. And of course, I'm not interested as a doctor, but as architect, I do, because I really feel that inside those spaces, there are so many qualities that we can find in the claustrophilic spaces, in the claustrophilic experience that I restarted to explore for this event, for this conference. What is very important for me is that being in the amniotic fluid, we have this idea, this perception of continuity, and the space is just a unique, a continuum. And what is important is also that we develop from that moment, and we continue to develop for the first 2 years, a sort of implicit memory. Implicit memory is the memory of the experience, is the memory of the emotions before we develop what is called the explicit memory, that is the cognitive memory. So the implicit memory is very important because it is, let's say, located into the amygdala, so it's really the storage of our first emotions. And we, along our life, we continue to look for this kind of emotions, and we try to reproduce it also in other places. Why a salmon? It's because a salmon is exactly what he does. He spent most of his life trying to find back the feeling of that amniotic liquid, even the smell, because when we are in the mother's womb, our breath is not into the air, is like the fish, we are rectile. So we breathe inside the liquid. So this is very deep. And this maybe is the reason why it's such an unconscious space that we try to reproduce also in other occasions. Richard Neutra, who was one of the first architects who declared officially his interest in senses, in fact, was writing in his book, Survival Through Design, that if architecture is an affair of many senses, its theater space is also a multisensory product that begin to evolve for us while we are still in the womb. And this is exactly what I explored for the conferences. What are the qualities of the amniotic space and why they are claustrophilic? First of all, the amniotic space is an haptic habitat. So visual qualities are not so relevant because everything is touched. So it passes through our sense of touch. And the visual space is not denied, but is strongly reduced. And the acoustic experience is stronger because we perceive low waves more than high ones. So we have a sort of what is called diaphragmatic perception. No? It's the body who listens. We are our earrings. And olfactive experience is deep and seminal. And we also change completely our sense of gravity. So the sense of up and down is completely reverted. So the amniotic spaces are horizonless. This is very important because then we will see where we will move on. And also the natural light is filtered. And filtering the natural light means not having shadows. And not having shadows means not having a natural rhythm of the time. So the rhythm of the time is driven by our body, not by the nature or not by the external spaces. So this is important because the quality of these spaces and following the quality of these spaces, I reached some unexpected places. First of all, this is an image I used many years ago that I like it very much because this is a think tank inside the McDonald's in Chicago. And they wanted to recreate this perception of womb, no? So you have a water mattress, water bed, silent, with acoustic absorption, no direct light, and mostly you do not stand up. You sit, you lie, but you never stand up in an amniotic space. We will see later. But mostly, what we try to feel when we are inside the amniotic space is to consider the space as an acoustic instrument, no? And the only perception is a perception through our body, through our touch. What is very important is that exploring the spaces with this characteristic, I arrived to two different ideas of jail, and prison that are quite different. The first image, the one on the left, is Black Mirror. The Black Mirror radicalized this idea of building a space that is absolutely minimalist. It's a cube with a lot of projection and only the place of your bed to lie down. Then, of course, it goes in another perversion, but it reminds me something else, where the prisons in the 70s for the political protesters or terrorists, we could say. In fact, they were working a lot on deprivation of senses. In fact, reading the diary of Ulrike Meinhof, who was a German terrorist belonging to the RAF. She was describing the sense of living into a jail where there are no natural light, only neon light. That means no time. It means every hour has the same lighting. No touch, because in her occasion the space is against her, so it's not the mother womb, it's the opposite. So the space couldn't be touched, couldn't be even written or carved, and the only sound she could listen is the beat of her heart. So the space is something that you explore yourself and you start having echoes with yourself. And she got mad. In fact, when she were allowed to meet her sister, she was asking to exchange the clothes for smelling another smell that was not her body. So, of course, when the womb is not a welcoming womb, is a rejecting womb, you get crazy because you are strongly reject. And this is also another shape. Sorry, behind here in the previous slide, there are also the description by the defense attorney, and the words he was using were quite interesting, you know, annihilated, destruction, the destruction of vegetative functions, and so this provoke emotional instability. And we don't know how she died, but for sure she got mad. So what I noticed exploring through claustrophobia, philia, and this kind of places that are quite close each other, what I noticed is that every disciplinary institution have a sort of claustrophobic or philiac spaces. So prisons, monasteries, convents, school, military academies, sometimes also factories and hospital, all the places that try to detach themselves from the real world, they create amniotic spaces. And this is the reason why, for instance, most of the time, the reuse of spaces like that is able only to host other spaces that are related to the disciplinary institutions. No? Universities inside convents, hospitals. So this is because they have the same nature, the same quality of the spaces. And of course, the disciplinary society has to deal with the internment environment. But what is interesting is that the crisis of the places of the internment, as foreseen by Deleuze, has produced on one side the dissolution of some spaces, but on the other side also the radicalization of some of them in something that is called self-internment. And this is also important because, of course, we believe that I Google, as everyone, when you say claustrophilia, you immediately go and Google what it appears, because we are academic, so sometimes we only speak for ourselves, you know? So we want to also know what the normal people think when they when they ask about what claustrophilia is. And it happened this nice image. And of course, claustrophilia is a research of safe places and try to deny any insidious relationship. No, is based on the needs of certainty, but also when people scare something and what they scare and why they scare. But what I found very interesting into this research is that what they scare is not only the normal fares, no, the war, to survive, and so on. But what they scare in the recent period, especially after the media era, is what is called syndrome of positivity. the syndrome of positivity is when you should be efficient, 24 hours available, when the market mostly asks you to commodificate yourself, commodificate your image, commodificate your life. Indeed, the risk of a panoptical era, as we are living now, create a sort of a strange paradox, because from the society of the control, from the control of the other over us, we jumped into a situation where we control us over ourselves. So we decide to expose ourselves to the control. No one is forcing us to be in Facebook, but we do. No one forces us to exhibit continuously what we are doing, publishing images and so on. So we give to the other the control of us without to be forced. And this is very, very important, because the claustrophilia at the end is an act of resistance from the private sphere. And I love this image because they are my friends. One of them grown up with me, and she's an Augustinian cloistered nun in Penabilli, in the center of Italy, and they smile. What is interesting is that I always thought that they should be so depressed. What they do inside, they pray. So probably their life is very annoying and boring and depressed. But they are not at all, because this is the self-reclusion. They decided voluntarily to stay in the convent, devoting their life to transcendence. That is at the other level that he was mentioning before. The needs of transcendence, the research of yourself, exploring yourself. So keeping distance, and the claustrophilia is a personal decision, as a voluntary decision, of course, create another relationship with the space itself. And I found a very interesting sentence from a monk, a Carthusian monk, in the south of Italy, in Serra San Bruno, and I wrote their diaries, and he said something very interesting. Say, the cell is an ocean of freedom. It is that sea from which nourishment is drawn, and he transports you to your final goal. The cell is my border, my horizon. That is exactly the opposite that we think. We think that you are closed, so you have no horizon. In this case, the horizon is the transcendence, of course. So exploring in this direction, I start thinking that there are many categories of claustrophilia. And this is a very nice book written by Kobo Abe, dedicated to the boxman. When I was living in Japan, there was this experience of salarymen that who lost their job, so they used to live in the cardboard houses built by themselves, and is not a sort of they decide to stay there. Is their own decision, having quite a normal life during the day, but then in the evening and during the weekend, they build and they live in these special boxes. And of course, this for me reminds me the Diogenes story, where the philosopher, the Greek philosopher, decided to live in such a small space in order to first deny the property of things, but also having a direct contact with someone else, but also playing with the roles in a different way, so being an heretical. Because we are talking about heretical people, and this is what mostly is the attitude of the claustrophilic people. From the hikikomori, that you know very well, it's a generation of Japanese, but this is also, let's say, an attitude that is growing also around the world. And I found this sentence from Andrea Branzi that he was considering the hikikomori as a young hermits of the nerd culture. And he mentioned also other one, like the plumb clinker that live upside down in the toilet bowls, or the howlingers who stand like holes on the roof. And we continue on that one, because what is interesting is how this kind of lives mostly are indicating us a new research of relationship with the space and to protect themselves. And what is very recent is the Tangping generation trend in China, where a huge number, quite million of young generation, they used to live only lying on their beds because they feel to be stressed by the continuous competitive market and requests. And this comes from an interview to them, and he say, we don't necessarily have to let it overwhelm. Overwhelm is a very key word for the reaction. And what is interesting is also that he said, our country have never cultivated a school of thought. This is important because they do not have a sort of developing of subjective thoughts, individual thoughts. So their lie down is, he say, my philosophical movement. So not as a collective movement, is an individual rebellion of a mass of people. So mass is a sum of individuals, and they do this on their beds. And then I found a very interesting concept close to them, that is the concept of Bannotticon, that is the opposite of Panopticon, because the Panopticon is the society of control, but Bannotticon is, it's a negative word created by the market to say that there are people that are not interested at all for the capitalism and for the neoliberalistic market, and they are banned off. But for the claustrophilic, let's say, behaviors, this is super positive. Bannotticon is, I don't want to be seen, I don't want to be in the center of your control. And even if you consider me as a waste, because I am a waste from the economical and financial point of view, I am like the idiot of Dostoevsky. I want to be the idiot, I want to be the eremit, I want to let me alone, and I want to find and explore other directions. And now I'm mentioning me, Professoressa Bassanelli, who comes from after me, but she found this word that I found very interesting, that is COVID home. And COVID home for me is very interesting because during the pandemic, even the space that Roland Barthes considered as the real private, your cocoon, couldn't resist. It was open. And it was so open that we needed to hide our privacy with the fake screen behind, being in the Maldives Island or something like that, in order to protect the entrance of the world, even in our bedroom. I remember my lecture with students from all over the world, and I was completely distracted from their bedrooms and say, oh, look at them, he play guitars. Ah, look at them, I couldn't listen to them. I should stop sometimes and say, okay, he's talking to you. Listen what he's saying. No, I couldn't. We are obsessed. We are interior designers. So, and now I go to the reason why I called the Ange Exterminateur, referring to the movie of by Buñuel, because of course there is also, let's say, one small part or a huge part of fears of something that keep the people into the spaces. In the movie there is this bourgeois community that they start to have a normal dinner, social dinner all together, and going into the movie, we understand that something is freezing them and breaking them, keeping them in their house without to move. So claustrophilia makes amniotic space a sort of also sometimes living grave, and people like sometimes to stay in the living graves. But and of course another movie that for me was quite interesting is Underground, because it's the metaphor of the a population inside underground, inside a falsified narrative, falsified story, but they believe that there is still the Tito and the war upstairs, and indeed when at the end they decided to again upstairs there is the Balkanian war, and they think that it never stopped. But this is for introducing you that it exists actually an amazing market of fears. And two of my students, graduating students, they decided to develop a research on bunkers. And why the market of bunkers in the last 20 years and before the Ukrainian situation grown in an amazing way. And who lives, why they live there, why people decide to live in the bunkers and underground. And the market of is fueled by fears, and the fears is fear of the passing of time that can ruin goods. So we have bunkers for art, bunkers for wine, but also we have the fear of losing the memory. So there is a lot of data centers underground that are again spaces for storage, for protecting, for saving. And you should know that the data center underground is 1/3 of the market in architecture in Europe, actually. 1/3. It's an amazing number. And another fear is the fear of the extinction. It's the biggest fear that grown the communities of the survivalists, as for instance the preppers. The preppers are the biggest community of survivalists who live in underground, and of course they feel that they should be the only survival eventually after war or after some climate disasters. And what is interesting is, for instance, this is the Vivos is a project of 575 bunkers for 5,000 people who live in Dakota, I guess. And so who are the preppers? As I told you, it's a globalized community of survivalists that radicalize this idea to go back in the Mother Earth womb to guarantee their survival and futures. And I finish my presentation with this slide again, because we are professors, we spend a lot of time with our students, and when you ask them for a research, they never go into the books. They go in Pinterest, Instagram, and then Google, and then, okay, if you mention some, there are the books, and then they also go there. But what is interesting is that we found this claustrophilia. And claustrophilia, this one, is it's an escape room in Budapest. It's so funny because they sell this experience as an unmissable experience for tourists. It has nothing to do with what we are talking about. No, it's a typical way how the marketing cannibalized concept and make everything so cheap. But it's interesting because it's the first in the list. Claustrophilia is, let's come to make your last selfie in Budapest. There's a lot of things to be seen, but claustrophilia, you cannot miss this experience. So what is interesting for me is that we have a very special, let's say, place for observing the changes. And especially after pandemic, we understood clearly that we cannot be open 24 hours. We cannot be available all the time. So in every life, a normal life, we are going to create a sort of time of claustrophilic time where we love to go back. We love to be unreachable. We love to create a sort of welcome space for ourselves, for the single person. And I believe that this kind of spaces will grow in the next future, not only as a reaction, but as a really a primary need of a human being. That's it.
Merci beaucoup pour cet exposé qui résonne parfaitement avec l'exposé d'Aurélien Fouillé. Donc c'est un aperçu vaste en fait, sur ces espaces matériels de la claustration qu'on a vu défiler dans la première partie de votre présentation et pour cet info qui est arrivé tout à la fin sur l'Ange Exterminateur de Buñuel, où en effet, oui, il propose donc comment dire, cet espace souterrain comme une sorte d'espace où les prisonniers se sont comme dans des tombes vivantes. Et là, c'est dommage que Roula Matar-Perret, que Roula Matar n'est pas là parce qu'elle pouvait peut-être dire un mot sur ce binôme worm tombe, donc ventre et tombe chez Gordomata Clark. Donc, est-ce qu'il y a des questions?
I have very tiny question, quite anecdotic, since then we'll have a more large discussion with other people. I was very touched when you talk about your experience with your students online, trying to chase some details of their interiors, because I did the same. I'm a teacher in design in first year. My class is Friday late afternoon, so it was a bit, tiring for everybody. And I was just trying to imagine in which kind of place, home, house, my students were confined by looking at their wallpaper or furniture and everything. And just a tiny question: do you know if such a gathering of experience as a teacher or else is on? Because I have the feeling that we will lose such experience of an unbelievable experience. So it's very tiny question, but this is the first time I heard someone speaking about that. So I just would like to know if or how we can make memories of that, like something that belong to all of us. Because from my point of view, the sanitary confinement is also a real worldly crisis. In France, we used to say it was a war, because even the First or Second World War wasn't that worldly as the confinement was. So how can we document that?
I really don't know if someone did. I'm sure that someone is doing the same as we are doing, some thoughts and maybe some writing. But I tried to explore a little bit with them. So one day I say, okay, now it's very clear. I knew exactly more on them. No, they were not just in the commons, in a shared space. So their biography was more complex, more, the one who was sharing with the dog, with the others. Most of our students, they were also in other countries, so in different time zone. That was even more exciting. And then I asked, okay, but now where you want to be? Can you create an image for your background? And so the second part was every day they were designing to have a different background as an aspirational place. And I'm writing a little bit on that, but I'm sure that if you want to launch Ecole, there will be a lot of professors. Maybe Michela has something to say, because she explored a lot of the COVID home and the impact of in design. If we can create sort of theory or some thoughts about what we discover, because we discover a lot of things about spaces, about behaviors, about the identities, and the theatralization of the interiors or not. But I don't want to say many things on you. If you want to launch a call, I will apply.